Taking a deep breath in. Once again, coming into this beautiful moment, we breathe in peace, we exhale love. Routine grounding ourselves, we take a breath in gratitude. So today's topic, again, I never know what I'm going to title the YouTube video, but what I have written right now is being at peace with yourself and the world. Being at peace with yourself and the world. And we're going to be going into a little bit of teachings about anger in particular, and offensiveness, defensiveness, and just the overall aspects of ego, and when we feel triggered by life, how do we channel that? And how do we cultivate a freshness and a peaceness even amidst thoughts and emotions of pain? Sound good? Mm-hmm. Relatable? And so, of course, a lot of this is inspired by just, all the recent events. 2020 as a whole, really. There's just been a lot going on, and you really can't get into a conversation with someone, a deep conversation, without acknowledging some type of discomfort or pain. And a lot of times that discomfort or pain manifests as anger or sorrow. I kind of like to sometimes think like depression and sorrow is inwards, and then outwards expression is when it comes out in frustration and anger. So it's like inner pain, outer pain. But I was thinking of this yesterday, and the first thing we have written is offensive and defensive dash a fence. Offensive, defensive dash a fence. So what about those things have in common? Fence is in the words, isn't it? And so offense, defense, there is a fence within our hearts. There is a fence within our mind that is creating a duality, that's creating a separation, an us against them, a me against them. And in Buddhism, they might reference this as it's important that we cultivate correct or right or aligned view. Because when you have funky views of the world, when you have funky views of yourself, such as you're believing in the ideologies of separation, of duality, you're creating a fence in your mind. You're creating that schism. You're creating that separation. And as long as that fence is there, you are going to suffer. Because all of the pain that we manifest, either if it's inward as sorrow or outward as anger, what's interesting is that it always has a root. It has a root story of less than-ism, whether we're judging ourselves as less than in some way, or we're judging other people as less than in some way. And then in anger, the manifestation of anger arises sometimes out of deep caring for things, because normally you get angry about the things you care about. Have you ever noticed that when someone's just so upset about something, but you just don't feel the same way because you don't view it as important, And a lot of times you'll notice that you get quite angry at loved ones the most, while you might be indifferent to other people. Or you might be, if your child does something, you get angry at them. When another child does the same thing, you're like, eh. So there really is there's a caring involved in it, which is interesting because I posted yesterday a long thing on my Facebook wall about anger and shared some Thich Nhat Hanh quotes. And then he actually, let me double check. I want to make sure I get his name correctly. I believe it's, Mike McGarry. He recently added me on Facebook, and he is a Dharma teacher in California, and he's used some of my quotes in his sermons. And so he commented on my anger thing, and I've listened to one of his sermons, and it's quite wonderful. But he brought up the quote by David White, who was saying, let me actually read the quote for you. This is, of course, a shortened version. So this is by David White, a poet. Anger is the deepest form of compassion. Stripped of physical imprisonment and violent reaction, anger is the purest form of care, The internal living flame of anger always illuminates what we belong to, what we wish to protect, and what we are willing to hazard ourselves for, which is absolutely true. But I always like to expand it. And so anger, for me, and what we would teach in Dunisha, anger would be a manifestation of misaligned view, a little bit of a misaligned compassion. When we have anger, it's definitely showing us what we're caring about, but sometimes what we're caring about is really just our egoic attachment to a view that we have towards life, a view that we have towards each other, a view that we have towards even afterlife, right? You know, the very essence of a view that we have towards God, just that one sentence has led to so many deaths, you know, on our planet. Maybe even the most deaths have been in an idea of God's name. And so that's what we would call as a misaligned view, because it's leading to harm. Doesn't mean that religion is wrong, but if we're overly attached to some identity that we have because of it, religion or political or cultural or even familial with our families, and we have that strong attachment and we care so much about something that we are willing to lose ourselves and cause others harm amidst it, that's something that we definitely want to realign, yes? Mm-hmm. So think about a couple times that you get angry, you know, even recently, you will be able to find it, that there is a source of care, there's a passion there, if you will. But in Living Peace, I talk about anger as a resistance. We are observing something that we do not like, and in our mind, we are resisting what we are observing, right? So we're not able to be at peace with this thing because we're looking at it and it's uncomfortable, and boy howdy, it makes me upset and I want to change it. And this could be something present reality, it could be something in the past. Who's ever wished for a better past? It could be something in anticipation in the future. And so going from the offense defense, where there's a fence in our mind, a duality, a dualism in our mind, a separation, then I was thinking about this, releasing the Goldilocks complex, the idea of just right. Releasing the Goldilocks complex, the idea that there's a just rightness that we can tap into, or even a just enoughness, that if conditions are just right, you know, just everything comes together in a certain way, then I'll be at peace. And that's some fucked up shit, because it doesn't exist. And that's something Buddhism really teaches, that things constantly come together, then they fall apart, then they come together, then they fall apart, etc., etc. And when we learn to be at peace with that process, that's when, or when we learn to accept that process, that's when we can cultivate peace. Whereas when we're constantly in resistance to that process, we're going to constantly suffer ourselves and cause other people to suffer. In Living Peace, I talked about some of the greatest harm comes from the idea of, if you are red and you want everyone to be red, or if you're blue and you want everyone to be blue, or you're purple and you want everyone to be purple, you're going to have a rough time. And so to the untrained mind in the crayon box, they're trying to make all colors like them. And only when the whole world is their same color will they think that then they'll know peace. Then there will be happiness. Then there will be peace on planet when we all just believe the same thing. And unfortunately, that will just never happen. It's kind of that one story, and a lot of religions have it, where it's like, you know, we're all climbing the same mountain, and the different paths are the different religions. You know, we're all going to be resonating with different teachings. Even if we're brought up in the same family, you might have a child that resonates in one direction and a child that resonates in a different direction. And so wanting all the colors to be the same as you so that you feel comfortable really, really is rough. And that just shows a deep insecurity with life when we cannot be comfortable amidst diversity. Ooh, that's a powerful quote. It shows our own insecurity with life when we cannot be comfortable with diversity. I like that. That was not even planned, but there it is. And so, we practice in Dunisha, we practice constantly training and retraining our mind that anytime we feel rigidness, dogmatism, anytime we feel anger, we notice that we're falling into the trap of dualism and dogmatism and rigidness. So we take a step back and we create room for that diversity. We create room for other viewpoints. We create room for compassion. And that's what my host was talking about with Thich Nhat Hanh, of just anytime you see someone in anger, they're in pain. And anytime you are in anger yourself, you too are in pain. And so what is the mutualness there? And this is what I expanded on. I called it the mutualness of suffering. So when you're able to see the mutualness of suffering, you naturally can cultivate a compassion for the other person. So when I see things happening in the world, and I see people I do not share the same viewpoints with, and I see some of their words are causing further separation or harm, obviously me getting angry is just me then becoming a being of anger, which does not benefit anyone in my present reality, right? And so I practice the mind to use compassion to dissolve the anger, to be able to look at them and see the story, or see the individual, or see the soul behind the surface level anger that they're projecting, or the surface level harm that they're projecting. And again, Thich Nhat Hanh is just the embodiment of this, because again, he was exiled from his home country, he saw his brothers and sisters murdered, and yet he still practiced compassion with every step rather than trying to seek out retribution. Interesting, isn't it? And so let's take a breath. So again, we have offensive, defensive, a fence. There's a fence there, releasing the Goldilocks complex of believing that just right, when the conditions are met just perfectly, just right, then I could be peace. And we say, F that, we're learning to cultivate it amidst no matter what is going on. But that doesn't mean that we don't constantly strive and we don't constantly take time to cultivate harmonious relationships and peace in the world. So anytime we see something directly in front of us that we can help with, we do that thing. Does that make sense? But it's coming from a place of inspired peace. It's coming from because when you practice daily, you're going to naturally be inspired by peace daily, rather than waiting for harm to occur and then you're motivated to act. When we're motivated to act, there's an aggression there within our being. There's a haste. There's a feeling of stress and pressure. This needs to happen. This is not right. Versus when we cultivate the teachings daily, we naturally are just practicing peace. And so everyone who crosses our path feels that from us. And we have a freshness in our mind so that we are more readily equipped to handle difficult situations. So let's go ahead and move on to the second section of today's sermon. And this is a nice recap. It's the 3 aspects of ego that I have in my book, Living Peace. It's one of the first chapters. And boy howdy, I just love this because it really breaks this idea of ego down in a digestible way, because every person or mother has a different idea of what ego means. And here in the West, it's often associated simply with arrogance and narcissism. We think of someone with an inflated ego, but the same is also true for deflated egos. It's really just an attachment to self, whether we're in self-pity, insecurity, or we're in hyperbolized self-image or self-indulgence. They're both ego because it's an overemphasis on self. So really just think of ego like that. I didn't think about writing it this way, but this is a great way that we can just go and put for this sermon. Ego dash an overemphasis on self. And again, it can go literally in any direction. Because it's the self that creates that Goldilocks complex. It's the self that creates the fence within offense and defense. When you release that identity of self, it's really hard to get offended. And so let's go ahead and write this down. 3 aspects of ego. Number 1, you could put push with a colon. Number 1, you could put push with a colon. Second one, pull with a colon. And then hold tight, colon, for the last one. Push, pull, hold tight. Some of you may already remember this, but it's always lovely to rewrite it down just because it re-solidifies it in the mind. So push is anytime we're in resistance. So anger would manifest in this aspect of ego. We're seeing things in life that we do not prefer, and it's creating a resistance. It's our dislikes. It's our displeasures. And then in number 2, pulling is another way you can write this word down as grasping or chasing. It's the grasping nature, it's the chasing nature that we have of the things that we do like, the things that we think will make us feel complete and whole, that will bring happiness. We can even call it chasing the American dream. So when we're attached to it, that's when suffering comes. When we're naturally cultivating it or allowing it, there's not as much suffering there. Because the thing is, if you're always chasing something, you're often never present in the moment. But if you're naturally just cultivating something every day that you enjoy, it's a bit different. You don't need it to be happy, but you still like to cultivate it anyway. And that's the biggest thing with all of these scenarios, is that even when you have a natural anger arising of the push, as long as you don't attach to it, you can learn from it and then redirect it. It's the attachment to things that causes us deep suffering and causes our suffering towards others. And then the third one is holding tight, dash fear of change. Fear of change. It often comes from a deep insecurity. We're holding on to some little semblance of whatever, insert word, because we think that there may not be more around the corner. And so we're afraid to let go of something. And obviously, as a therapist, I've worked with a lot of people over the years that they hold on to abusive, very abusive relationships in fear that there may not be something else out there for them, or a very abusive job because they're afraid there might not be something else. Now, again, this does not mean let go of everything all at once and then just safe fall. That does not work. That's not the middle path. It's about being mindful. What are we attached to? This we see a lot in America right now, where there really is some white nationalism going on. Whether we like it or not, it's there. And there is a deep fear within people when they see culture starting to change. And that culture that a lot of people are used to is white, it's Christian, and it's heterosexual. And since I was a teenager, I was subject to this, and I saw it very clearly, even before it's reaching its head up out of the ocean right now like a monster, because I was always an outcast as a gay individual. And so I was able to see how uncomfortable my existence made other people, because it made them question their concept of morality and their concept of what being American is. And so that's why I'm always fascinated when people call other people un-American, because that's one of the biggest fences. Now we're turning on each other and saying, well, this is American and this isn't. And so for me, my idea of America is quite diverse because I'm part of the diverse pot. I mean, we forget that it's only been 5 years that gay marriage has been legal. And we wouldn't even be here today if it wasn't. And so it's so fascinating that holding tight to a certain ideology, to a certain comfort, rather than recognizing that when we're sharing space with others who are different from us, it does not need to take away from our own identity. It does not need to take away from our own sense of security. What actually cultivates a sense of security, is acceptance, is openness, is freshness of the mind, rather than being fearful of what is unknown and what is different. And that probably is one of the benefits of being gay, is that I had to really actualize that in my being very early on in my adult growth, if you will. And so I'm someone that's not really afraid of change. I'm not someone that's afraid of diversity. And when new information comes in, I'm really eager to understand it. Whereas a lot of people are not, because they feel threatened by differences. But again, if you're on the outside, you kind of have to deal with it. And that's what happened to me, and that's what happens to pretty much every gay person. But also a lot of minorities, they see it for what it really is. And so I bring this up just because it really fits perfectly into this aspect of ego, where we're holding on to some idea, some identity. But of course, in Buddhism, the final teaching, well, also in Living Peace, is to release the identity, release the self. Because when we're overly attached to it, it's an impermanent thing. It doesn't stay the same. It just causes unnecessary suffering. And I've given a lot of sermons on that, so you can click through. So 3 aspects of ego: push, the resistance; pull, the grasping for, holding tight, the desperation to not have change. When we're able to recognize when we're in either one of these aspects or all 3, we can know that we are in misaligned view. We are in a viewpoint that is causing ourselves and other people suffering. We're creating duality of the mind. And so when you're able to notice that you're in egoic thinking, you can learn to shift it much more quickly and reconnect with a more expansive view of this planet, a more expansive view of your own sense of self. Because who's had a judgment of yourself before? That's egoic, because you're narrowing down just a little bit of negative focus on one aspect of your entirety of being. And that's so delusional, because you are so much more than that one aspect. Or now think about viewing life right now. Who's been negative towards life lately, right? What we're doing is we are fine-tuning a negative focus and ignoring the rest of the totality of the planet, of the universe. And so it's that needlepoint focus that the ego really likes to get its footing in. And what's fascinating about this is, even if you're focusing on just such a small aspect of reality, it can make it feel like 99% of reality. And that's why meditation is so powerful. That's why these teachings are so powerful, because they can help awaken us to our delusions. And so that's why I tell folks, and Zen's really big on this, just sit your ass down and just observe what's going on in your mind. Don't preoccupy your mind with anything else. Don't give it something to do. Allow the boredom to come. Because when you allow the boredom to come, you're going to notice the idiosyncrasies of your mind, and you'll eventually start to see the silliness of it. But a lot of times, again, there's a lot of different meditation practices, and mantra work can really help. Yogic practices can help for certain situations, and chanting can help. There's so many different practices, but in Soto Zen tradition, they're really big on just sitting your ass down and just being with it and being bored out of your fucking mind. Because from that boredom actually arises a clarity. Because even if you might want to count your breath to get focused for 5 minutes. And focused is even a manipulation. You're trying to manipulate the situation. But after that 5 minutes, just letting go and just observing whatever naturally arises. And this is, a few Zen masters have talked about this over the years. Because when you're focused still on your breath the whole time, you're focused on your breath, thus you're missing the moment. Isn't that interesting? Because we often think of the breath brings me to the moment. But if you're overly attached to the breath, you're overly attached to the mantra, you're actually missing the totality. Does that make sense? And you might miss seeing the fullness of the mind and its silliness, silly creations that's causing you to suffer. Again, that's another sermon for another day. I just thought I'd kind of share that. So in conclusion, we'll take a breath. Being at peace with yourself and the world. Being at peace with yourself and the world. We release the three aspects of our ego: pushing, pulling, holding tight. We remove the fence within offense and defense so that we learn to live without needing either of those two things. Because we realize that we don't have to feel separate from the world to feel safe. And we release this idea of the Goldilocks Complex of, quote, just right or just enough. Once XYZ is in place, then I can feel XYZ. But we recognize that that's delusional thinking. So we breathe in peace, we exhale love. That's our sermon for today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. As always, links are down below for any YouTubers who'd like to get more involved. We have a Facebook online community group. There's donation links as well, and links for those who might want some training in our tradition of Dunisha, and my book available on Amazon. We will see you next week. Blessed be.